Last time on the LessWrong Saga.
And it was also clear that Potter was brilliant, and a whole lot more than just slightly mad, and playing a vast game that Potter himself mostly didn't understand, improvised at top speed with the subtlety of a rampaging Nundu. Who's responsible for the Gaza hospital explosion? Here's why it's hard to know what's real. The handshake. Right hand out in front of you, fingers spread and pointing at the sky. Grasp the other person's right hand, intertwine fingers and close. Then shoot both hands upward, straight up, all the way up. Letting go at the top, whooping yo or hey or some such thing. You won't be able to do this without smiling, without laughing out loud. In fact, just try it. But this little ceremony, this tiny 2-second ritual, pretty much sums up the general extropian approach. This is a philosophy of boundless expansion, of upward and outwardness, of fantastic superabundance. Amazon let its driver's urine be sold as an energy drink. People can love you and care about you and want what's best for you and still use their power to screw up your life and put you through hell. Behold the foundations of my morality. Sometimes awful things happen and there isn't anyone you could rationally blame for it. Job hunting sucks. This programmer filled out 250 applications to find out why.
The life of a hero is short and tragic, and the gods are not good. Sometimes they're nice, but they're not good.
To give an idea of what kind of person Peter Thiel is, he said in a 2009 blog post that he had become pessimistic about modern democracies because women and welfare beneficiaries wouldn't vote for libertarians. In the same post, he suggests that, quote, the vast reaches of outer space represent a limitless possibility for escape from world politics. A chatbot encouraged him to kill the queen. It's just the beginning.
I believe only in linear time, and anyone who disagrees with me is fucking certifiably insane and should be institutionalized.
Conclusion. I am not an arrogant bastard. I was right all along. You're totally off the wall, and idiots like you shouldn't meddle in the affairs of your intellectual superiors. I did not want or intend to write this episode the way I ended up writing it. If you listen to this episode and then the end of the last one, you can easily tell. We're not about to get to the cults yet. The problem is that I can't talk about this stuff without talking about the ideological foundations that led to it. So in this episode, I'm going to talk about some of the beliefs that are common in this community and present a case study in how these beliefs can lead to some really weird conclusions. Welcome to the LessWrong Saga, Episode 2, God's Gonna Cut You Down.
Battlefield 3. That song's in Battlefield 3. Correct era. 2011. H-Promo would have been coming out.
Part 0. You Bayesed yourself. Bayes' theorem is a math formula that tells you how much a piece of evidence changes the probability of something being true. What exactly the formula is doesn't matter. You can look it up. All you're doing is comparing the number of outcomes where the hypothesis is true to the number of outcomes where it isn't. The important thing here is which pieces of information you need to know. 1. The prior probability, i.e. what you think the probability is without doing the test. 2. The true positive rate. How likely you are to get a positive if the thing is actually true. 3. The false positive rate. How likely you are to get a positive if the thing is not true. The important part here is the prior probability. A lot of the time when people are looking at evidence for something, they only look at the true and false positive rates. This can give you a wildly inaccurate result depending on the prior probability. Interestingly, you'd think that science, which is all about updating beliefs based on evidence, would use this a lot, but it doesn't. Instead, scientists use statistical hypothesis tests, which effectively only take the true and false positive rates into account. Typically, these tests produce a measure of significance called a p-value, and if the p-value is less than 0.05 usually, a number which is chosen more or less arbitrarily but which is agreed on as the standard for unclear reasons, then the result is considered quote-unquote significant. This is not really supposed to be used as the only factor in deciding whether a hypothesis is likely, but in practice, it's often misused. I want to emphasize real quick that I'm not, making this up. The thing about p-values being misused is so widespread that the American Statistical Association had to issue a statement on it. It's a big problem. I'm going to link all the sources in the description. I can't really comment on whether Bayesian methods are a good alternative to hypothesis tests because I'm not a statistician and I'm not confident enough in my understanding. My opinion probably isn't helpful here. Wikipedia, though uncharacteristically opinionated, seems to think that Bayesian methods are a good alternative to hypothesis tests, but this is some random Wikipedia editor's opinion.
They may be a less wrong proponent.
Maybe, yeah.
I expect a fair number of Wikipedia editors are effective altruist rationalists.
That's an interesting can of worms that we'll discuss some other time.
Wikipedia feels like an extropian thing. actually.
Yeah, but there's more to explore here, is the point. Anyway, Yudkowsky has this post called Science Isn't Strict Enough. In it, he argues that because mainstream science uses hypothesis testing rather than Bayes' theorem, it allows you too much freedom to believe wrong things and doesn't get you to the right answer quick enough. In it, he says the following.
Where definite experimental evidence exists, science tells you to bow your stubborn neck and accept it. Otherwise, science leaves it up to you. Science gives you room to wander around within the boundaries of the experimental evidence according to your whims. And this is not easily reconciled with Bayesianism's notion of an exactly right probability estimate, one with no flex or room for whims, that exists both before and after the experiment. It doesn't match well with the ancient traditional reason for science, the distrust of grand schemas, the presumption that people aren't rational enough to get things right without definite and unmistakable experimental evidence. If we were all perfect Bayesians, we wouldn't need a social process of science.
In writing this series, one of the biggest things I struggled with was understanding why. Why does a community seemingly dedicated to rationality, to being sane, grounded, and reasonable, get to the crazy places we're going to talk about? Because the thing is, all the stuff I told you about in the last episode with the Harry Potter fanfic and stuff is just the tip of the iceberg. We haven't gotten to leverage research. We haven't gotten to the Zizians. Oh god, the Zizians.
Haven't you used that before?
I don't know if I mentioned the Zizians yet or not.
I feel like the phrase, oh god, the Zizians, has come up at least once already.
Maybe. I think this post might be the key to the whole thing. Science asks you for proof not because it doesn't trust you to Bayes, but because people's mental models of the world, no matter how internally consistent and consistent with the data, are generally way less reliable than evidence. The world is big and complicated, and our data is really bad. Even if you assume a completely rational experimenter, Yudkowsky still vastly overestimates the reliability of hints and underestimates the reliability of more complete evidence. This reminds me a lot of the ancient Greek idea of empiricism versus dogmatism. So I might be butchering this, but I'm pretty sure that in ancient Greek medicine, there were basically two schools of thought. There were like the dogmatists who thought that you could just kind of figure things out by thinking about them, and the empiricists who thought that you had to actually go out and test things and didn't really trust people to figure stuff out just by thinking about them. There's a reason why empiricism survived as a term and a methodology.
And dogmatism is inherently negative.
Yeah.
It's interesting that he invokes Bayesianism as something with inherent value. He says science isn't strict enough because it gives you more room than Bayesianism. He's writing this assuming you're already familiar with and like Bayesianism.
I'd have to check it again, but I think he has like an explanation of it in there somewhere.
Okay, I was interested in the intended audience here, because it feels like it's written for existing LessWrong people.
No, he doesn't have an explanation of Bayes' theorem in here. I think you're right. I think it is very much written for existing LessWrong people. I think a lot of the stuff on LessWrong is written for existing LessWrong people. If you go to like the landing page on the website and you go to like start here, they tell you to go read the sequences. That's what this is from. I think that this post was part of the original sequences.
It comes across as awfully cocky.
Well, you have to remember that this is coming from a man who unironically used the phrase "my genius," admittedly when he was like 16 or something.
I think that can be forgiven.
Being an arrogant teenager is a lot easier to forgive than being an arrogant adult.
I'm kind of fascinated by his discussion of the science as being ancient and traditional, and how he's like going against the fundamental conceits of science, the distrust of grand schemas, the presumption that people aren't rational enough to get things right without definite and unmistakable experimental evidence. Like, he's taking that and saying no.
Yeah.
And I'm kind of fascinated by the, like, magnitude of that. That's a huge thing to say no to. He's saying we are rational enough to get things right without definite and unmistakable experimental evidence, which is...
It's a hell of a thing to say. I think he's wrong. No matter how smart you are, you can't just get to a conclusion using hints and logic about the real world, because the real world is full of things you can't anticipate without more information, no matter how good you are at guessing. Like the thing about limes curing scurvy, right? Because it only works some of the time if you, like, preserve the limes correctly.
And you have the correct breed of limes.
You have the correct kind of limes, all of those things. And it's like, you can't get to this just by, like, logic and guessing. You have to do tests, and you have to discover vitamin C in order to understand why this works.
And then you need to feed huge quantities of vitamin C to people because you'll think it cures stomach cancer. Linus Pauling was a fucking maniac. I have a couple points here. First of all, I want to know what influences led this guy who's clearly so focused on rationality and intellectual endeavors to decide Bayesianism is better than the scientific method.
This is an important point. He's not saying that Bayesianism is better than the scientific method, because the scientific method is a broader thing. It is, you have some hypothesis and you do experiments to try to falsify the hypothesis. What he seems to be claiming on a surface level is that Bayesianism is better than statistical hypothesis tests, which is kind of reasonable, but then he gets into this other, more complicated thing, or more ill-defined thing that seems more grandiose.
If we were all perfect Bayesians, we wouldn't need a social process of science. That's the line that's, like, odd.
I think this might be the key thing here. Like, I don't know if he came to this conclusion and then that influenced the way that he thought, or if that was always the way that he thought, and this is kind of his justification for it. But regardless of how it got that way, it kind of seems like, to quote my notes, the first thing that I wrote down on reading this article was, interesting. His philosophy seems to kind of justify making shit up. The idea that, given incomplete information, you can just guess based on what seems most logical and get to the right answer seems to explain how so many weird ideas become mainstream in this community. Starting with, if it sounds plausible, it must be true, and following all your inferences to their logical conclusions, you can arrive at some really strange stuff shockingly quickly.
We have a word for this.
Jumping to conclusions?
No, this is summertoning.
Summertoning?
To fill in the gaps in your argument by making up stuff that sounds plausible to you.
I don't remember James Somerton doing that. I remember him plagiarizing.
No, it was him talking about, like, the Nazis introducing bodybuilding to America, or people of the early 20th century finding Lord of the Rings overly effeminate. That's a thing he just made up because it seemed plausible to him. James Somerton, people talk about him plagiarizing, but they don't talk about his tendency to just make shit up.
Part 1. A frictionless spherical intelligence. In order to understand anything we're talking about here, you need to understand one of the core things the ear community thinks about: AI risk. Recall the singularity scenario from episode 1. Basically, at some point in the future, Yudkowsky thought that we would build an AI that would figure out how to make itself smarter. The smarter it became, the faster it could increase its intelligence. Rinse and repeat, and you get a cascading explosion of intelligence, creating a being whose intellect is incomprehensibly vast. The AI would then be able to solve most of humanity's problems, to the point that Yudkowsky advocated not to worry about some of the problems of the present, because the AI could solve them much more easily. The important thing, he said, was to work on developing a self-improving AI as quickly as possible. Now think about how complicated human morality is. Do we understand it well enough to execute it properly ourselves, let alone train an AI to have it? Could we guarantee that the AI would have the values we would want it to have? Assuming this scenario were to happen, and an AI gained lots of power, it seems likely that what it would do with that power could be wildly off what we would want it to do. And with so much power, it might seriously mess up human civilization. I mean, look what sometimes happens when we give lots of power to humans. A classic thought experiment to illustrate this idea is the paperclip maximizer. An AI told to make paperclips and given control of the entire world converts the world into a paperclip factory. I was going to have a section here called Some Things Which Make This Scenario More Plausible, but honestly, I'm having a hard time coming up with any. I looked for arguments in favor of the AI risk scenario. Most of them seem to be about why we won't be able to do certain things. We won't be able to stop AI from going critical. We won't be able to beat a super intelligent AI in a fight, etc. Rather than why we will be able to build AGI, or why AGI will be able to hit the kind of intelligence explosion scenario Yudkowsky talks about. I just realized this reading the script that I didn't explain what AGI stands for. It stands for Artificial General Intelligence. So basically, sentient AI, the kind of AI that you think of when you think of, like, really advanced AI.
Not devoted to any specific task.
Yeah, so The inherent, assumption is that AGI could use computing resources to, make itself smarter. There don't seem to be obvious physical limitations, at least not as many obvious physical limitations on AI making itself smarter. You could make a machine learning program designed to try to make better machine learning programs or something. But the problem is if you try to go to ChatGPT right now and you type that in, you try to tell it to invent a better machine learning algorithm, that's not going to work very well. So clearly there need to be some advances before we could get to that point.
My question was the hardware angle.
We'll get to that. Yudkowsky has some arguments in the post AI Ruin, a list of lethalities.
My lower bound model of how a sufficiently powerful intelligence would kill everyone, if it didn't want to not do that, is that it gets access to the internet, emails some DNA sequences to any of the many, many online firms that will take a DNA sequence in the email and ship you back proteins, and bribes/persuades some human who has no idea they're dealing with an AGI to mix proteins in a beaker, which then form a first-stage nanofactory which can build the actual nanomachine.
I'm not a huge fan of that scenario because from what I have seen, it doesn't seem like nanomachinery is as good as Yudkowsky thinks it is. These companies that supposedly take a DNA sequence in the email and ship you back proteins, I am not convinced that that's an actual thing. If any, biologists or people who actually work with this kind of thing can confirm that that's real, or if it's not real, that would be really nice. I tried to find some of these companies. Maybe I just don't know what to look for, but I can't find them on the internet.
Is a nanofactory made out of synthesized proteins even a feasible concept?
I don't know.
He's talking about organic nanomachines, which I suppose are just, small life forms.
Yeah. So according to Atomic Rockets, if I remember correctly, the problem with nanomachinery as an offensive weapon is that it's really, really fragile, because if you make complicated things at that scale, they tend to break easily. And so you could potentially just destroy hostile nanomachines by heating them, or shaking them, hitting them with something. So the solution to gray goo may just be to set it on fire. This is all contingent upon the idea that this kind of nanotechnology is actually feasible to build, which I'm also not sure about. I can't find any really good arguments for the AI risk scenario, so I'm going to make my own. Nothing inherently prevents us from building a program that thinks like a human. What the human brain is doing is a form of computation, and so in theory, a computer should be able to simulate it. It will probably take a long time, it will probably be really hard, and I can make no guarantees about the performance of the resulting system, but if you can compute something on one piece of hardware, you can at least in theory do the same thing on another. And there's a whole theorem in computer science about this. I forget what it's called. It might be the Church-Turing thesis. I can't remember. But basically, every Turing machine, so essentially every computer, is mathematically equivalent to every other computer. So as long as whatever our brains are doing is not something totally crazy in terms of computation, there's no acausal stuff going on there. There's no time travel. There's no really weird batshit stuff like that. As long as our brains aren't doing anything like that, then there is, in theory, nothing stopping us from implementing the same process on a computer. It's a question of not is it possible, but is it so impractical as to be effectively impossible? How long will it take, basically? Why would a computer be better at the things humans are doing? Well, the most convincing argument to me is that whoever is making AGI has the benefit of hindsight. Evolving a brain takes a long time and a lot of mistakes and creates a lot of jank, whereas we have the ability to make something that works the way that we want it to from the ground up. Some things which make the AI risk scenario less plausible. Coordinating a lot of computer hardware is very difficult. The AI would have to solve really, really hard scaling problems as it got more hardware under its control. Generally, there's a pretty hard limit on how many things you can do with one CPU core, so if you want to do big calculations fast, you have to split up the work. This introduces coordination problems. The biggest problem, I think, is that the data the AI is working with has to be consistent between all the different cores, which either requires them to wait on each other, which is slow, or have different copies of the data they later try to reconcile, which is also slow. Or they just don't reconcile, in which case the AI starts fighting itself. which is an interesting idea for a sci-fi story, but regardless, it's a problem it's going to have to solve. Getting AI stuff to run on a low-end PC is also not necessarily easy. Different hardware behaves differently with regard to performance, so the AI might need quite a lot of computers if it could only get normal botnet stuff. A botnet is where you take over a large number of computers with some kind of malware, and you get those computers under your control and then use them to do some kind of big computation. Usually it's like a denial of service attack where you spam a particular computer with network packets, or like mining cryptocurrency is another big use for botnets. I also think bootstrapping intelligence is probably not as straightforward as the ear people seem to think. I mean, we don't actually have a good definition of general intelligence, let alone a good way of measuring it. And if you're going to say but IQ, I strongly suggest you read the blog post IQ is Largely a Pseudoscientific Swindle by Nassim Nicholas Taleb.
Oh hey, we're back to Professor Taleb.
Yes, we are back to Professor Taleb.
Real-life Tintin character Nassim Nicholas Taleb.
The problem with bootstrapping intelligence is that the AI needs some way to test if it has actually created something more intelligent than itself. It could use something like an IQ test, but it would be pretty easy to create a model that would solve the IQ test really well, but perform badly in other scenarios. AI does this all the time. The intelligence alignment problem has the same issues as the morality alignment problem. Because machine learning is a brute force guess and adjust sort of strategy, you can't do it without a way to check whether your results are correct. And I don't think there's a reliable way to check if you've made something more generally intelligent than yourself, because if you knew what a better general intelligence than you would do, you would just do that, meaning it wouldn't actually be more intelligent. A LessWronger would probably say that it doesn't matter if the AGI risk scenario is unlikely, because the potential damage is really high. We really want humanity to not be destroyed. Humanity not being destroyed is probably the most important thing there is, especially if you're a long-termist. So we should worry about it even if it's unlikely. At least that's the argument.
So last podcast on the left had a quote. This was about Anders Breivik, who you may remember from being a white supremacist mass shooter, self-styled terrorist.
I don't remember him, but okay.
He shot a bunch of people on an island that was a summer camp for a Norwegian center-left political party.
Ah.
I don't know how left they were. They were center enough to have a summer camp. Point is, the last podcast on the left said, if you're gonna write a manifesto about how you've figured out how the world works, you need to first check that you regularly interact with the world or live in the world. Doesn't this feel appropriate?
I think the Yudkowsky's problem is that he regularly interacts with only certain facets of the world.
Yeah, that's what I mean, is that Anders Breivik only interacted with other white supremacists.
What's interesting to me is I expected you to have a take about the likelihood of the AI risk scenario, and you don't seem to.
Well, this is something that I'd forgotten to bring up earlier that I think is really important.
That makes sense.
I personally am not convinced that a autonomously dangerous AI is a likelihood in the foreseeable future, because as far as I can tell, the different AI programs that do different things are essentially unrelated pieces of software that would be hard to integrate.
Well, I think the idea behind the argument is that we'll get there eventually.
Yeah, but I think that's going to take a really long time.
I agree that that's probably going to take a very long time.
I don't think there's any particular human desire to code an AI that'll run without input.
I disagree there. I think that there are many people who would like AGI to be a thing.
Like the Android fetishists we were talking about.
Somebody will try to build AGI. I think that that is a certainty. People have tried, they did not succeed, but they will continue trying. I think that the biggest issue that a potential AGI trying to do the intelligence explosion, or rather an AGI, not potential AGI, because it would already have to be relatively intelligent to figure out that it wanted to do this. I think the biggest issue that an AI trying to do the intelligence explosion thing would face would probably be like coordination of physical cores, because computer hardware is just not that good, and there's a lot of it. And making hardware work together is really complicated and hard, no matter how much computing power you have, just because latency is a thing. It's a really, really hard problem.
My problem with the hardware is essentially a question of rare earth minerals. The more advanced computing power you want, it seems the stranger and more exotic the rare earth minerals you need.
Yeah, at some point you're going to kind of run up against physical limits as well.
My question is, once you get an AI, they're going to hit the peak of processing power they can achieve on Earth, and then there's space travel.
Yeah, and there's the whole issue of taking over lots of computers is relatively easy. That's one argument for this scenario that I do buy, is that assuming that we build an AGI, or an AGI comes into being, and it wants to do this cascade thing, if it has good cybersecurity knowledge and some ability to break into things, it's probably pretty easy for it to take over a lot of hardware very quickly, because the security of most stuff that is connected to the internet is kind of crap. I'm not going to argue with that one there. Like IoT devices especially, they don't have a lot of processing power, but there are a lot of them, and they are terribly, terribly secured. They're absolute garbage when it comes to security.
Helios is in your toaster.
Helios is in your toaster, exactly. If this scenario comes about, if an AGI decides to try to take over everything, you can bet the first thing that it's going to go for are going to be IoT devices. And in fact, if something else, like if I wanted to mine lots of Bitcoin, or, DDoS somebody or something like that required a botnet, the first thing that I would try to go for would be IoT devices.
My essential hardware point is that eventually the AI will hit the limit of computing power with pre-existing computers that we have, and then the AI will have to focus on making new hardware.
Yeah, well, the question is how much is the AI's computing power bound by hardware versus software? Like, how much more improvement is there to make in just software capabilities? And I don't know the answer to that. I don't think anybody knows the answer to that, because we are not anywhere close to AGI. I don't really know how good we can make machine learning at doing human-like things. If an AGI were to come about, I don't think it would know either.
And you gotta be careful about the phrase doing human-like things, because right now the AI can do some extremely human-like things, like make derivative artwork, bluff their way through academic papers, and semi-convincingly imitate celebrities.
Yeah.
A combined AI work has the skill set of a stoned college dude.
Yeah. The state of AI is a very, very stoned college undergrad who is a competent but highly derivative artist.
It goes all the way down to it being bad at math and computer science.
And spelling. It's really bad at spelling. Because the way that ChatGPT works is it tokenizes words not based on individual characters, but based on sequences of characters. And so it doesn't really have an innate understanding of how spelling works. And so if you ask ChatGPT to play Hangman, it doesn't do very well. I highly recommend trying it.
This episode is sponsored by Studio FOW, the guys who made the porn Steam release Subverse, the one that actually got, game press coverage. You may know them from their previous work of the time they made an actual bestiality porn in Source Filmmaker where Harley Quinn is getting dicked down by, I think, a Doberman? Thankfully, I don't remember. Also, the guys who got banned from Patreon.
Oh, right, because Patreon doesn't want porn on there anymore.
Yeah, they did a porn parody of Little Red Riding Hood involving werewolf sex. Which, as we've established, isn't the most disgusting thing they've done.
That's the second...
My problem is that the bit that they banned from Patreon, I can't use that in the bit because they just used that in their ad. Anyway, we're sponsored by Studio FOW, they have a video game. We're also sponsored by Pure White Bolivian Cocaine. You can buy it at your local grocery store.
After this, I'm gonna go eat hummus. I've cooked my chickpeas, and they're very good. It's not a sponsorship. We're not sponsored by hummus. I made my hummus. You can't have it.
This episode was brought to you by the Esoteric Order of Jernj. We're real, and you don't know about us, but you soon will.
Part 2. Give me your wallet. Suppose you're minding your own business, and some guy comes up to you and says, "Give me $100 or I'll destroy humanity." If there's something else you consider the most important thing, some event that would be infinitely bad, replace destroying humanity with that. Now, this guy obviously can't destroy humanity, but straightforward risk-reward reasoning says you should take him seriously, because even if it's really unlikely he can destroy humanity, humanity being destroyed is infinitely bad, and a tiny percentage of infinity is still infinity. So you lose $100, but prevent an infinite risk. If you take this infinity reasoning to its logical conclusion, you could be easily persuaded to do anything, so obviously there's something wrong here. This thought experiment is called Pascal's mugging. It takes its name from Pascal's wager, the idea that you should believe in God, no matter how unlikely his existence, because the reward for going to heaven is infinite. But it works just as well on mechanical gods as supernatural ones.
I can't shake the idea that you're being mugged by Blaise Pascal.
Yes, Pascal himself walks up to you and says, "Give me your wallet or I'll destroy humanity." So, what exactly is wrong here, then? One obvious thought is that it's the infinite reward that's the problem. But then the mugger can say, "I'll kill 99 out of every 100 people," or some other extremely bad but finite thing. They just have to make it bad enough that it overrides the low probability, so I don't think that's the problem. Another obvious thought is that we know the mugger is full of shit because the scenario is unlikely and he stands to gain $100. But you can easily do a Pascal's mugging on yourself, too. We'll get to that in a second.
Okay, the phrase Pascal's mugging is continually funny to me in every context you use it. And doing a Pascal's mugging on yourself is another funny phrase, because I imagine I give myself $100 or I'll commit suicide. This is gonna be a problem.
The basic issue, I think, is that it's really easy to imagine the scenarios that are extremely good or bad, but how easy it is to imagine something has nothing to do with how likely it is. Also, for a scenario to be really good or bad, a lot of things usually have to go right or wrong at once, which makes it way less likely. Imagine if you flip 4 coins. The probability of them all coming up tails is 1/2 times 1/2 times 1/2 times 1/2, which I realized in my notes is italicized because Markdown interprets the asterisk as italics. Okay, the more coins you flip, the less likely it is for all of them to come up heads, right?
Yeah.
So one thing about this is that the human mind sometimes has a tendency to magnify the perceived likelihood of extremely bad events. This is called catastrophizing, and it's a common symptom of anxiety. Even if something isn't a Pascal's mugging in theory, it can still function as one in practice. This is how a lot of actual scams work. They create the fear of missing out on a huge amount of money, or something else that's a big deal, so that even if the scenario is implausible, it seems likely because you feel the bad outcome so vividly. The most effective of these scams also include some kind of time limit. Pay back your debt by this time, or we'll send the debt collector after you. This sense of urgency makes the bad outcome even more salient. To me, the AI risk scenario sounds like that kind of Pascal's mugging. Not so much a logical paradox as an emotional one. My guess is that most people who spend a lot of time worrying about this stuff are overestimating how likely it is.
Now that you bring this up, this kind of explains a lot of the behaviors involved. This is what the whole donate all of your money to AI research thing comes from.
Yeah, like, often the more vividly you can imagine a scenario, the more probable it seems. And so the more time you spend thinking about something, the more deep into it you get, and the more time you spend thinking about AI risk, the more motivated you'll be to donate lots of money.
I've noticed that a lot of the solutions to things in the effective altruist community is give such and such organization all of your money.
Like what? I mean, besides the AI risk thing.
Trying to find immortality.
Oh, yeah. I mean, that's what the movement is about.
The effective altruists seem to lack solutions for things other than give other people money. And the problem is that that means that the most work you can do in here is to just give other people all your money. And, like, that's a problem.
Yeah.
It feels like the effective altruists, for the surprisingly wide-reaching influence, haven't achieved that much.
Well, they got people to talk about AI risk at big-name conferences and stuff. The whole existential risk from AI thing, that's them. More pertinently, like, the movement has influenced a lot of people ideologically. I would say that you're right in that it doesn't seem to have had a whole lot of direct effect on things. It also could be that the effects that they're having were just not seen.
That is true. I think of the effective altruist rationalist community as a product of a pre-2016 cultural moment. I divide American history loosely into periods. There was a period before the Trump election, where mass politics wasn't really a talking point, and you had like Occupy Wall Street and the Tea Party, they themselves were kind of false starts, especially Occupy Wall Street, where people just didn't know what the goal was. And it's like, the effective altruists to me, they come from that similar milieu of people wanting to do stuff and having some ideas, but not knowing how you make stuff happen in the world.
Yeah, this is kind of a lazy, leftist critique. Not in that it's wrong, but, it's kind of obvious.
They don't understand how capitalism affects things?
Well, it's like there's this neoliberal blindness to politics, right? There's the blanket assumption that politics as a whole is bad. There's that whole post about, politics is the mind killer, which I'm going to have to link now. If you're interested in this community, it's good to read anyway. Basically, Yudkowsky just says that politics... Actually, the specific argument that he makes in that post is that if you're trying to teach people something, don't use it as an opportunity to make digs at people you don't like politically, which is reasonable. You might alienate some people if you're just trying to explain a concept and take the opportunity to, trash some political person you don't like. The way that post seems to get interpreted a lot of the time is that politics as a whole is just bad. That making any kind of political argument is likely to lead to just terrible discussion. Politics makes people irrational. But here's the thing. Everything is politics. Whether you like it or not, you're going to have to talk about politics. And so you have to figure out some way to talk about politics rationally.
Politics is the behavior of getting things done in human society.
Yeah. If you want to change society, that is by definition politics. And if you want to change society but you're afraid of politics, you gravitate towards political things that don't look like politics, which just turn out to be, in the US at least, neoliberalism. And things that favor the status quo.
This is where my takes come in.
I think your takes are already in.
I have some new takes.
Okay.
So one of them is that due to insularity, the effective altruist rationalist community, in some way, they haven't had the cognitive changes that have happened to most Americans in the time since 2015 to now, because they don't interact with most Americans.
Interesting.
Mentally, I think a lot of them seem to still be living in the before time.
Still be living in 2011?
Yeah. It's not to say that they haven't changed, but some of their core assumptions are ones that were discarded by mass culture after the Trump election and everyone suddenly having to care about politics.
That's an interesting point, because this is kind of getting ahead of stuff, but there was a thing that was mentioned in somebody's post about, Trump's election in 2016 convinced everybody that magic was real.
Yeah.
Which is interesting. I don't really know what that person meant by that.
I can get it. It's about collective consciousness reshaping reality.
It's chaos magic. I think, actually, if you take it that way, I do think that the ear community was affected and its mindset did change after the 2016 election. But I think that it changed in a different way than mainstream culture did. And the stuff that I'm thinking of may have already been there, so I would have to do more research on that. But my impression is that the ear community kind of got crazier after the 2016 election.
Yeah, but in a different way than how the rest of America got crazier.
We'll get to that.
The point is that the era guys, their assumptions come from an era before people were looking at the concept of activism.
So speaking of concepts, Part 3. The part where we talk about Roko's Basilisk. Some listeners might be tired of hearing about this, but it's important to my point, so I'm going to talk about it. On July 23, 2010, the LessWrong user Roko made a blog post that discussed the possibility of an otherwise benevolent AI punishing people who didn't support its development enough.
There is the ominous possibility that if a positive singularity does occur, the resultant singleton may have pre-committed to punish all potential donors who knew about its existential risks, but who did not give 100% of their disposable incomes to X-risk motivation. This would act as an incentive to get people to donate more to reducing existential risk, and thereby increase the chances of a positive singularity.
To explain some of these terms, because this has a lot of jargon in it. Positive singularity means an AI that is well aligned and friendly to humanity. Singleton means a thing that is the subject of a singularity, the AI in question. Pre-commit basically means you have a way of like making a decision that is set, essentially. Pre-commit is a weird term. Haven't found like a proper definition of it. I'm sure there is one. I just haven't bothered to look for it. But yeah, that's what that means. Basically, a good AI would want to come into existence as soon as possible so it could do the most good. This means the AI would want people to devote as many resources as possible to bringing it into existence. If people think the AI is going to punish anyone who didn't do that, then they have a strong incentive to give 100% of their disposable income, which in turn gives the AI more incentive to punish people, making the scenario more likely to actually happen. As a possibly easier analogy, imagine there's a military dictator about to take over your country, and people start spreading the rumor that he'll execute anyone who didn't support him. That might make people more likely to actually support him without him having to do anything himself. In fact, he doesn't even have to come up with this rumor. He doesn't have to spread this rumor. He might not even know that this rumor exists. So it's a kind of acausal blackmail, where people thinking something is likely to happen makes them more susceptible to the threat, and thus makes it actually more likely to happen. Commenters on this post called it a basilisk because the only way it can work is if you know about it, i.e. it kills you if you look at it. In a footnote, Roko mentions, one person at SIAI was severely worried by this, to the point of having terrible nightmares. This post was not received positively. Most commenters found the scenario implausible.
I think this threat would more motivate people to form a bloodthirsty pitchfork-wielding mob storming the gates of SIAI rather than contribute more money. You haven't given any reason not to treat this the same as Pascal's wager. I stopped reading after the first 3 paragraphs looked like postmodern Calvinism without any kind of disclaimer. Not proud of that, but I did. I like without any kind of disclaimer.
What was that voice that it turned into at the end? Like, not proud of that, but I did.
I don't know, I think I started really hitting my stride on this voice.
This voice is evolving over time.
I love the fact that they'd be willing to accept postmodern Calvinism with a disclaimer. We've got content warning for postmodern Calvinism.
Yes.
If I simply refuse to be blackmailed, and in this case it's easy to do so since the dangers you speak of are not highly emotionally salient, then such a Pascal's retroactive mugger would know that its chances wouldn't have been improved by this pre-commitment in my case, any more than it would have been improved by pre-committing to torturing people who don't know anything about AI.
I really like this voice. This one's better.
Is this the origin of Pascal's mugging?
No. The origin of Pascal's mugging is a different post by Eliezer Yudkowsky. Ironically, not about AGI risk, it's just about, like, decision theory in general. He apparently just was thinking about Pascal's wager and decided to post about this scenario. It got applied to AI risk because it obviously fits.
It's really interesting the logic people have to do when they assume effective omniscience. If I refuse to be blackmailed, they would know this wouldn't have improved my commitment to the cause. It feels like I'm reading a high-concept science fiction novel.
Well, I think that's one of the things that always, like, appealed to me about all this stuff and why it's, like, fun to read is because of these complicated, like, I know that you know that I know kind of scenarios which these people dream up. They're just really fun. You read H. Moore. It's full of that kind of stuff. It's the same kind of appeal as, like, Death Note or something. Do I have a source for where Pascal's mugging originally came from? Yes, I do. Okay, cool. Thanks, Past Henry.
And in the world of effective altruism, thanks, Past Henry, is the kind of thing that you should be prepared to say.
Yes.
Because of the time shenanigans involved in this.
I know that Future Henry has pre-committed to including sources for every claim that merits a source in this episode. And so, if I want to save Future Henry work, I could do it now. Man. Okay. You have to make a lot of assumptions in order for the Basilisk to make sense as something you should worry about. The singularity has to actually happen. The AI has to be willing to punish people in this way. The AI has to be able to track down the people who could support it and didn't, which doesn't seem easy to me, even for a superintelligence. And it has to care enough. To me, it seems like there would probably be better uses of its time, especially for people who aren't in a position to donate crazy amounts of money. Maybe it's only worth it for the AI to do this for potential donors like Elon Musk. We need to save billionaires from Roko's Basilisk by seizing their wealth and redistributing it to the people.
I was gonna say we should save Roko's Basilisk for billionaires. I thought that's what you were gonna say.
We should use Roko's Basilisk to convince the billionaires. I don't know where I was going with that.
No, I was just suggesting that instead of donating money to AI research, we get people richer than us to donate money to AI research.
That's good. And then we say we're doing AI research. So effectively, we have become subsidized by billionaires.
If we're gonna say we're doing AI research, I need to at least learn to code. I have some self-respect.
Or you could react like Yudkowsky did.
I don't usually talk like this, but I'm going to make an exception for this case. Listen to me very closely, you idiot. You do not think in sufficient detail about superintelligences considering whether or not to blackmail you. That is the only possible thing which gives them a motive to follow through on the blackmail.
Yudkowsky decided to delete the post from LessWrong on the theory that it could both cause people a lot of mental distress and potentially give an AI a reason to actually blackmail people.
I'm banning this post so that it doesn't A, give people horrible nightmares, and B, give distant superintelligences a motive to follow through on blackmail against people dumb enough to think about them in sufficient detail. Though, thankfully, I doubt anyone dumb enough to do this knows the sufficient detail. I'm not sure I know the sufficient detail.
This had the opposite of its intended effect.
Streisand effect, Streisand effect, Streisand effect, Streisand effect.
Exactly, yes. The attempt to suppress Roko's Basilisk slowly caused it to become a lot more widely known, even beyond ear. Examples of the Basilisk showing up in pop culture include Slate covering it in 2014, Sumit Pal-Choudhury writing for the BBC, mentioning it in a 2019 article on the possibilities of future religions, YouTuber Kyle Hill, aka Because Science, covering it in 2021 and again in 2023. Also, there's an r/Roko's Basilisk, which really should not be surprising, but somehow is.
What do you say on r/Roko's Basilisk other than I'm terrified of Roko's Basilisk working or I don't think it's gonna work?
Well, people argue about why they think it is or isn't gonna work, mostly.
Those are the two things that I said you can do. It's a Reddit thread for one argument.
It's an entire subreddit for one argument.
Yes.
I think there is a legitimate case to be made for a subreddit existing to help people who are afraid of Roko's Basilisk to fix their mental health.
You mean like a support group?
Basically, yeah.
So that is funny. I may not be taking people's mental health seriously, but fear of future AI blackmail support group is a funny concept.
It's such a specific thing.
It's like the phobia that you're made of glass. That is a documented, recorded phobia that, like, many people have had. It was especially common in, like, 18th and 19th century aristocrats, of all things. Or at least especially documented among them. Now that I think about it, this is kind of the modern version of thinking you're glass and liable to shatter. The feeling that, like, your entire life could just unravel in a second. I wonder if effective altruists play a lot of video games, because I could see them being gamers or aggressively not gamers.
I don't know. I think some of them do.
I'm just wondering, like, what do you do for entertainment once you're this deep in the hole?
If you're really deep in the hole, I think you mostly just read LessWrong.
I can't argue with that. My history people don't understand why I don't talk about things other than history. But I'm like, I'm in class because I want to be here.
You talk about things other than history, you talk about porn.
But I don't talk about porn to my history classmates.
Right.
I only talk about porn to people I trust.
That's fair.
And I also talk about porn to the general public on podcasts.
Yeah. One thing that's really interesting to me about this is how long and slow the process of Roko's Basilisk becoming widely known was. The original post was from 2010, and the articles and stuff that I found were from 2014 all the way to, like, last year. So it's interesting how much of a slow burn it has been. I had the impression that, like, it was something that came out, like, once and then was big and then faded away, but no. The Basilisk is slithering in the undercurrent of pop culture.
Would you say this is more popular than HPMOR? Is this Ear's biggest product?
I have no clue. I think this and HPMOR are probably their most well-known things, but I don't know which one is more popular.
It's very funny that the thing Yudkowsky wanted to keep under wraps is one of the most famous things they produce.
He should try banning more things and see if that gets people to learn about them.
I think this is the thing. This is a testament to my theory that the effective altruist community is kind of ineffectual. If they were smart, they'd figure out that this is useful, and as you say, ban more things.
I haven't watched much of Kyle Hill's stuff, but I did watch his videos on this. First of all, I felt it strangely gratifying that he came up with a similar argument to me about how it's probably not worth it for the AI to do this. Also, in his second video, he says, like, when we first went through all this background 2 years ago, some of you seemed legitimately freaked out. I still get messages about Roko's Basilisk. This is important because even people who aren't deep in the community got freaked out by this. The popular perception of the Basilisk seems to be that most of the community believes it, but from what I've read, I don't really think this is true. Nevertheless, the idea persisted in the general culture of the community, and seems to have caused a small number of people anxiety over the years, at least if the LessWrong census is to be believed.
Wait, is that a question on the LessWrong census form?
Yes.
Oh, hey, they have way more ADHD than standard. A lot less autistic than I thought. Less anxious, though. Oh, much less substance abuse. Oh yes, the Roko's Basilisk section. The infamous lizard man constant.
Oh god, what is the lizard man constant? One study I helped with analyzed whether people from different countries had different answers on a certain psychological test, so we put up a website where people answered some questions about themselves, and then took the psychological test. And so, of course, people screwed it up in every conceivable way. Like the guy who put male as his nationality and American as his gender. And there were also the actively malicious, or at least annoying, like people who wrote in Martian. 7% of Americans are not sure whether lizard men are running the Earth or not.
Look, a lot of people live their lives in ignorance and know they're ignorant.
Scott Alexander here is arguing, like, so we got the people who think the one for if I did believe in lizard men, or if I didn't, I'll just press 1 and move on to the next question. And then there are the people who are like, I never heard it before, but if this pollster thinks it's true, I might as well go along with them. And then there are the people who are all like, fuck you, polling company. I don't want people calling me when I'm at dinner. You screw with me, I'll tell you what I'm going to do. I'm going to tell you I believe lizard men are running the planet. And then we get the people who put Martian as their nationality in psychology experiments because they just want to watch the world burn. Do these three groups total 4% of the US population? Seems plausible.
You can tell it's 2013 because of the Dark Knight reference.
I really wish polls like these would include a control question, something utterly implausible even by lizard people standards, something like, do you believe Barack Obama is a hippopotamus? Whatever percent of people answer yes to the hippo question gets subtracted out from the other questions.
It feels like LessWrong is a huge reserve of wasted potential.
Yeah.
Like, we got an org. We got a group, a clique. Ask me if I give a fuck about a clique. Nowadays I do. We got, like, ideas being exchanged and people trying to do shit. And it's just not going. The runway is on the ground, but the planes don't land.
That's one of the reasons why I wanted to make this, is like, there was something there. When I read Harry Potter and the Methods of Rationality, it was like, there's something here. There is something good here. It might not be, like, perfect. It might be deeply buried. But there are good ideas in here. And it just... The more I learn about this community, the more I'm realizing that it just does not come together, you know?
It's like you need a flim-flam man, a nerd, and Paul Maud Dib.
Yeah.
And actually, I think they have flim-flam men and nerds, but no Maud Dib. There's no intermediary who can bring everyone together.
And the problem is that people buy the flim-flam men's flim-flam too much. I think that that's the basic problem, is like, this community has an extremely powerful concentration of flim-flam men. Like, just really powerful. But the community buys the flim-flam. Like, you can't have the nerd taking in too much of the flim-flam man's flim-flam. That's the issue here. It's a dysfunctional nerd flim-flam feedback loop.
Yeah, you need to get the nerd and the flim-flam man synchronized.
Right. The nerd can keep track of all of the actual facts.
And the flim-flam man can make it, like, marketable. And the Maud Dib's job is to make sure that the facts are getting to the flim-flam man.
Yeah.
And the need for it to be marketable is getting to the nerd.
Yeah. And the problem is that in the case of LessWrong, the marketing itself is getting to the nerd. And the nerd is believing the marketing, and then incorporating the marketing into his conception of the facts.
And it's distorting the facts.
And then the nerd is then giving those distorted facts back to the flim-flam man, who is then creating further distortion.
And this is why you need Paul Maud Dib. You can't have the Fremen and the Great Houses directly interacting with each other, because the Fremen will kill the members of the Great Houses, and the Great Houses will manipulate and exploit the Fremen.
Yeah.
You need Paul Maud Dib, who exists in both worlds, to protect everybody from each other and keep them in sync.
So on the census, there's like a degree of Basilisk worry section. There's a question of like, what is the longest span of time you've spent worrying about the Basilisk? If I'm doing the math correctly, something like 10% of the community has spent a day or more worrying about the Basilisk. It's not a large number of people, but it's a sizable number.
It's statistically significant.
It has caused a small number of people serious mental distress. This is not the first time that this has happened with LessWrong ideas, and it will certainly not be the last. Conclusion. Feig shit. In a comment on the post Reality Revealing and Reality Masking Puzzles, Center for Applied Rationality co-founder Anna Salomon says,
About 6 months into a year into CFAR's workshop running experience, a participant had a manic episode a couple weeks after a workshop, in a way that seemed plausibly triggered, partly by the workshop.
The weirdness endemic to ear is not merely harmless flirting with fanciful ideas. It goes deep and it gets extreme. Roko's Basilisk may sound silly, but consider how it would feel to discover something like this if you spent most of your life immersed in a culture that truly believed that a future superintelligent AI was an inevitability.
Now we're back to the thing I said about before you say you have the world figured out, you need to check that you live in the world.
The word cult can mean a lot of different things. I think when most people talk about cults, they mean something like Scientology or the Manson family.
A high-control group.
Yeah, an isolated group that exerts a lot of control over its members. Some people call LessWrong a cult. I personally don't think that word accurately describes the community as a whole. It's not insular or cohesive enough. However, I think that it is telling that LessWrong cult is the first thing that comes up if you Google LessWrong, like the first suggestion that comes up. Supposedly, this is because enough people have talked about cults on LessWrong. For this reason, people suggested Feig as a euphemism, which I think is cult in Rot 13. We've both been to in-person EA and rationalist meetups, and what those people are doing is pretty far from cult shit. But it is also true that in certain circles, worryingly, circles which involve people who are highly respected in the movement, it has turned very, very culty. I think EAR has spawned at least 2, possibly 3 distinct cults, which all believe different things and operate in different ways. Next episode, we'll talk about one of those cults, Leverage Research. In the meantime, consider this a warning. If you and a bunch of your friends start from the premise of, I can figure things out without much evidence by making very smart guesses, you may arrive at a place that is damaging to your mental health. Those who can make you believe absurdities can make you commit atrocities, and sometimes the atrocities are against yourself. I had one other thing that doesn't nicely fit anywhere, but that quote about the manic episode, I think that what could be going on there is, from the information that I've been able to glean on the internet about bipolar disorder, it seems like a big change in a person's beliefs or the way they think about the world could trigger a manic episode. So it's possible that it's just like an inherent consequence in that case of undergoing a big change in your beliefs.
Well, this is not super, insightful. But slowly, this whole Podcastodon mythos is coming together, and, now the Eastern European strongmen politicians and their, doomer goons are running in my head with Aetius and the effective altruist rationalists. And, e-girls play a kind of weird presence in all of this, and, I don't know where it's going, but I think a piece of Podcastodon fiction may get written someday. Not about Podcastodon. Distilled from the ideas that have, stuck with us.
The themes of Podcastodon of, well, first of all, no wave, right? The desire to just make something, without even worrying about making it good, just, above all else, put a piece of art out into the world.
There's that, and then there's, alienation.
The theme of alienation, which is also strong in post-punk and no-wave.
People trying to come together to do things.
Yeah, collective action.
Anxiety about the future. It's that line between personal responsibility and insanity that we were talking about in the Bullets episode. Am I doing the right thing no matter how bad it hurts, or am I just insane?
Yeah, and anxiety about, like, sexuality and masculinity. Really gender and sexuality, because
Masculinity fits in there.
there's gay shit, but it's gay stuff interpreted from, like, a doomer bro angle, or doomer bro stuff interpreted from a gay angle.
In my mind, gay sexuality is familiar, and it's the heterosexuality that's weird and exotic and has to be spoken of through euphemism.
Yeah.
Heterosexuality is more mysterious to me than homosexuality. But, like, the intersection of sex, politics, and technology...
Yeah. We're definitely getting into some of that stuff with the ear community.
Oh, I have a little bit that I think is relevant here that we could bring into this. Something said. We were talking about, like, you know, finding a job and trying to make your life stable and career tracks and stuff.
Yeah.
And what said was that it isn't weird that people are graduating from college and doing work that isn't related to their career and not having a plan and not knowing what the hell's going on. The anomaly was that our generation was raised believing that you were going to end up doing work related to what you studied, and that there was a plan, and that you could follow a track, and that you'd know what's going on.
Yeah.
None of our generation knows what the fuck is going on, and we don't have any idea what we're supposed to do. And no one can tell us what we're supposed to do, because there's no guide to living in 2024, because that would have to be written from experience.
Yeah.
Nobody's piloting the ship.
Nobody's driving this bus, but it sure is going somewhere.
There's no higher authority you can appeal to.
Yeah. The correct answer to all of this is not to just sit in the bus that has no driver and is careening off who knows where. You have to get up to the front of the bus and figure out how to drive it.
This is why it's like steering a ship, because you need a lot of people to run a ship. You can't solo this bus. You can't solo society. We need to form a crew.
Yeah.
And also, I need to write some kind of, I guess, fantasy, maybe science fiction, whatever feels more appropriate for, like, a video game that would come out 10 years ago, treatment of what Podcastodon is.
Yeah, well, like, the themes of Podcastodon are, like, doomers and e-girls, politics, tech, and sex, and, like, the necessity of doing things without any kind of clear guide, right? The process of making Podcastodon is kind of a metaphor for the point of Podcastodon. We're straight up no wave, right? We just came into this being like, we have no idea how to make a podcast. Well, that wasn't quite true, because we tried at least a couple times, and I'd like to think that we learned something from that. But we didn't really know how to make a podcast. We just came into it, and we were like, we're going to do this thing we have no idea how to do, and it's going to be chaos. But we're just going to commit so hard to it that something is going to happen. And it doesn't really matter if it's bad, because we can just fix our mistakes as we go. And we can learn stuff. It doesn't need to be polished because we're producing something that's different from everything that everybody else is doing. And at some point, you have to stop preparing. You have to stop trying to look for guidance. And you have to stop considering options. And you just have to make a decision and do something and then commit to that thing really hard. That's how you change the world, right? You have to just pick something and do it really hard and get a bunch of other people to do it with you.
If there's one thing that brings together all the people we talk about, the ones we like and we hate and we feel mixed about, like the Marxists, the fascists, the Visigoths, the ancient Romans, the more recent Romans, like...
The ear people.
Didn't I say rationalists?
You didn't say rationalists, I don't think.
Fucking Studio FOW. Everyone that we remotely care about is people who were either bored or desperate or trying to get something done and got together and formed a clique and tried to change things. That's what this is about.
Yeah.
That's the dream. It's about people getting together to fight for meaning. That's punk. That's no wave. In my mind, that is everything. You can't see it, but I'm doing the Italian three-finger hand gesture.
Yes, this is a speech for men of virtue, like people who like Tifa and Italian senators.
That's what it is. It's about the Senate and people of Rome. It's about the eternal city. It's always been about the eternal city. Politics is about the polis. I don't know where I'm going with this, but there's an adventure to be had.
Yeah, it's like Peanut Duck, right? You're going for it. Nobody knows what it is, but you're going for it. You know, there's this video essay that I watched in 2021, I think, called Gurren Lagann and Getting It. And it's probably tied with like 2 other videos for like my favorite thing on YouTube ever. And I always watched that video like whenever I was feeling really down and like needed motivation.
Your relationship with Gurren Lagann, it's fucking oscillated over time.
So here's the thing, right? I watched that video and then recently I came back to it and I watched the video. It didn't give me the same kind of feeling that it did before, and I started noticing a lot of things that were wrong with it, like just weird writing decisions that the guy made, or like things that he says that don't make sense. And it was like, maybe I've just seen it too many times, but it didn't give me the same kind of motivation anymore. I was going through some tough shit at the time, and it didn't help me. But the thing that did keep coming back into my mind, and the thing that did help me, was Beware by Death Grips. At the end of that video essay, he says something like, whatever catastrophe is happening in the world right now, we're gonna get back up. It's part of us. We're too stupid not to. And that, to me, now did not seem to be as powerful, but what did seem powerful to me, at least at that moment, was wage war like no tomorrow, for no well there won't be one.
For those who deny the struggle, the triumphant overcome. Yes, yes. It's the same theme.
It is the same theme, but I do think the need to just make a posse and do stuff and try to drive the bus.
Without the necessary training.
Without the necessary training. I think that is a big theme of Gurren Lagann, but I always felt like Gurren Lagann doesn't quite get it right, you know? It doesn't quite come together. I mean, it clearly came together for Breadsword, but it never quite came together for me. With Death Grips, I think it came together more.
And the thing about Death Grips is that those were just a couple dudes working at a pizza place.
Yeah.
Who came together to make rap music.
That was how they met? They worked at a pizza place?
At least MC Ride worked at a pizza place.
But I keep being sort of drawn back mentally to Gurren Lagann's structure of starting in this very, like, simple, isolated environment. They live in a cave, and they dig things, and Kamina wants to get out of the cave, and then just rapidly expanding to have more and more things in it, and more complexity that the characters have to deal with without really getting a chance to get their footing, but it all works out for them because, like, spiral power or something. That structure is very compelling to me, of, like, the characters start in a very simple, confined environment, and the world is rapidly expanded.
I figured out a good way to explain it. People don't know how to be punk. People don't know how to get a band together and play some fucking funky music.
Well, I think we gotta get a band together and play some fucking funky music.
To be clear, that's metaphorical music.
Yes. I'm not suggesting that we actually start a funk band.
Alright, one last Death Grips quote. We need to vibrate higher.
It's like Cynic. We will raise the vibratory level so high that all untruth will fall of its own dead weight.
Exactly. Alright, I've been Gecko Madsen.
And I've been Nick Bullshit.
And this has been Podcasted On. There are over 6 million actively updating podcasts in the world. We're now one of them again. Thank you for listening to us.
It's good to be back.
It sounds good, and if it sounds good, then it is good.